Hi, I'm Mark, and as promised, we will talk about the meeting with Macron and Sunak and their migrant deal today. In order to prevent migration across the English Channel, Great Britain wants to detain migrants in shelters and deport them. And a new warehouse, so to speak, is to be built in France. As soon as he arrived in Paris, Rishi Sunak made it clear that there was a different tone in Downing Street with him. Close neighbours, great friends, historic allies, he wrote on Twitter. The British Prime Minister travelled to a summit with French President Emmanuel Macron on Friday to open no less than a new chapter in relations between London and Paris. There had been no Anglo-French summit for 5 years. The last meeting took place in 2018. The British Prime Minister at the time was called Theresa May. In France, Macron was already in office. After that, the relationship between London and Paris cooled off significantly. As Prime Minister, Boris Johnson patrolled warships in the Brexit fisheries dispute. Successor Liz Truss responded to the question of whether Macron was a friend or foe with the sentence, "The judgment is still open," and which means something like, "That has not yet been decided." But Sunak has made this decision. He wants to sweep up the political mess left behind by his predecessors. Macron is apparently willing to help Sunak with this. The two seem to get along well, which may be due to the fact that they are not only about the same age, but also trained investment bankers. In addition, both are ailing domestically, so nice pictures with allies are not a disadvantage. Macron should be looking forward to the visit of King Charles as well, who is expected at the Palace of Versailles at the end of March. In any case, on Friday it could be observed that Sunak and Macron were serious about the entente cordiale. Macron welcomed Cher Richie in front of the Élysée Palace, and then both put an arm on the other's shoulder and cheerfully went to the working lunch. In addition to economic and security policy issues, the program also included the question of how the two countries deal with people who cross the English Channel on tugboats to get from France to Great Britain. In the past year alone, around 46,000 entered the kingdom illegally. They are people that London would most likely like to send back, but since Brexit, that's no longer the case. The UK is no longer part of the EU's Dublin system. And because former Prime Minister Johnson did not conclude an agreement on the repatriation of migrants as part of the withdrawal agreement, Paris sees no reason to accommodate London. From the French point of view, this is Brussels territory anyway, so Sunak would have to start talks with the EU Commission. But the Prime Minister doesn't have that much time. A new British Parliament will be elected next year or the beginning of the year after, and Sunak promised to stop the inflated boats. In order to prevent migration across the English Channel, Great Britain will pay France more than €500 million now over the next 3 years. This is to finance a new detention centre in northern France, as British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced at the meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron in Paris. And this will more than double the annual payments from the British government to France. A new command centre is also to be built with €541 million, and 500 additional border guards as well as modern drones and surveillance equipment are to be deployed. Channeling migration must be tackled jointly by all EU countries, and this should include transit countries as well as countries from which the traffickers who organize the crossing of migrants in rubber boats across the English Channel operated, said Macron. So he went back to the EU there. Prime Minister Sunak said it was a common challenge, and Sunak takes a hard line on immigration policy. He recently announced a new asylum law. We talked about this. It provides for almost all migrants who enter the country without official permission to be held in detention camps such as former military bases or student dormitories. After that, they should be expelled to Rwanda or other countries. The right to apply for asylum should be taken away from them. The British government has indeed admitted that the project is pushing the limits of international law, but I say it's clearly breaking it. As French President Emmanuel Macron said, France cannot negotiate an agreement with Britain alone to take back refugees. It is an EU matter. After Brexit, Great Britain, I mentioned that earlier in the video, but it's important, can no longer apply to the Dublin regulations that apply in the EU, according to which migrants can be sent back to another EU country if they have already stopped there on their flight. Paris and London have long worked together more closely on defense and security issues than on migration issues. Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine has made voting even better. Judgment, not voting. This should become even more evident in the future with arms deliveries and the training of Ukrainian soldiers. Paris and London are looking to improve ties with a fresh start after years of bickering over Brexit. There should be closer cooperation on defense, energy supply and curbing unwanted migration, as French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said on Friday after a meeting with cabinet members from both countries. After the relationship between the countries was sometimes difficult for years, Macron now said this is clearly a moment of rapprochement, reconnection and new beginnings. Specifically, the two spoke out in favor of strengthening the government in Kiev for a way out of the Russian war of aggression. We have to put our Ukrainian friends in the best possible position so that they can determine the timing and terms of negotiations, Macron said. Sunak emphasized that a future solution is solely a matter for Ukraine. They want Ukraine to win the war, and therefore weapons would be supplied and soldiers would be trained. The aim is a successful counter-offensive, and Macron also said, "We are doing everything so that this war does not expand, does not spread worldwide." Macron also stressed that France and Great Britain wanted to expand their defense cooperation within the framework of strategic autonomy. Beyond the Ukraine conflict, it is a question of increasing the joint military capacity and increasing the ability to cooperate in the technical and operational areas and with the troops. Projects for the joint development of a new anti-ship missile and cruise missiles are underway. Another point is the combinability of their air defense systems. Despite all the declarations of friendship, there is something else besides Brexit that is still causing resentment in Paris. The AUKUS military pact, which London concluded with the USA and Australia in 2021. But this Friday in Paris, nothing should disturb the familiar unity they are showing. At the final press conference, Sunak thanked Macron with words that have not been heard from a British Prime Minister for a long time. "Thank you, my friend. Merci, mon ami." And that is quite interesting that the tone has changed this much with Sunak compared to Liz Truss or Boris Johnson. But it still doesn't end the discussion, because that Sunak, and he must have brought up the topic of sending back migrants that are coming over the channel to Britain, to send them back to France. They definitely should by now, if they haven't understood it for the last years, they should by now finally have understood that they are not part of the Dublin Agreement anymore. And that Macron had to tell him that this first is the case, that they are not part of this agreement anymore, and that it is a matter for the EU to negotiate. That is really... Probably Sunak had to bring up that topic for their own press and their own Brexiteers that still believe that the EU has to do what they want because they took back control of their borders, but no matter. But it is kind of ridiculous that this topic even came up after such a long time of knowing the answer exactly. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.